"Put that glass down right now before you ruin anything else," I screamed, my voice echoing across the beautifully decorated ballroom of the historic estate we had rented. My 8-year-old nephew Leo was holding a glass of dark red grape juice directly over our $5,000 custom ice sculpture. A devilish grin plastered across his face. Before I could even take a step toward him, his 6-year-old sister Mia shoved him from behind, sending the entire glass of sticky red liquid splashing all over the pristine ice, the silk table runners, and my custom designer white silk dress. I gasped in absolute horror as the dark red stains spread rapidly across the bodice of my dress, which had cost me $3,000 in months of fittings. My sister Rachel walked over leisurely, sipping her wine, and let out a soft, annoying giggle that made my blood run cold. "Oh, calm down, Elena," she said, waving her hand dismissively as if I was overreacting to a minor spill. "They're just sweet little children having a bit of harmless fun. And besides, white is such a boring and high-maintenance color for an engagement party anyway." I stared at her in utter disbelief, my hands shaking as the cold juice soaked through to my skin, ruining the happiest night of my life. My fiancé, David, rushed over with a handful of cloth napkins, his face pale with shock as he tried desperately to dab the stain out of my dress. But the damage was already done. This was not just a simple spill. It was the culmination of 3 hours of absolute chaos caused by Rachel's completely undisciplined children whom she refused to control. Earlier that evening, Leo had used a permanent marker to draw scribbles on the hand-painted antique wallpaper of the venue, while Mia had physically knocked over our 3-tier engagement cake because she wanted to lick the frosting before we cut it. When the venue coordinator approached Rachel about her children running wild, Rachel had simply rolled her eyes and told her to mind her own business. Now, my beautiful dress was ruined, our expensive decorations were stained, and my sister was standing there laughing in my face. I looked at Rachel and told her in a low, dangerous voice that she and her kids needed to pack up their things and leave my party immediately. Rachel's smile instantly vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated outrage as she took a step closer to me. "Are you seriously kicking your own sister and your only niece and nephew out of your engagement party over a little juice?" she shrieked, drawing the attention of all our guests. "You are an incredibly selfish, bitter woman, Elena, and you clearly care more about expensive material items than you do about your own flesh and blood." My mother, Karen, rushed over to intervene, immediately wrapping her arms around Rachel's children and glaring at me as if I was the villain of the story. "Elena, do not make a scene at your own party," my mother whispered harshly, pinching my arm. "Your sister is a busy mother of 2. She is exhausted, and the children are just excited for you. So you need to apologize to them right now and let them stay." I looked at my mother, then at my sister, and realized that the enabling behavior that had ruined Rachel's personality was never going to stop. David stepped in front of me, his tall frame towering over my mother and sister, his voice firm and completely unyielding. "No, Karen, Elena is not apologizing to anyone tonight," David said, his eyes locking onto my sister. "Rachel, your children have caused thousands of dollars in property damage tonight. They ruined Elena's dress, and you have done absolutely nothing to stop them. You're going to leave this venue right now, or we will have the estate security escorted you out in front of everyone." Rachel let out a dramatic gasp, pretending to wipe away a tear as she grabbed her children's hands and began walking toward the exit. "Fine, we are leaving, but remember this day, Elena, because you will regret treating your family like garbage," she yelled back over her shoulder. My mother glared at me with pure disappointment, hissed that I was tearing this family apart, and followed Rachel out the door. The rest of the night was a blur of embarrassment, and we spent the next morning dealing with the furious venue manager who presented us with a bill. The total damage to the historic wallpaper, the ruined silk linens, and the emergency cleanup fees came out to exactly $5,400. I immediately scanned the invoice and sent it to Rachel via email, along with a photo of the ruined antique wallpaper and a polite request for her to pay it. Her response was almost instantaneous, consisting of a wall of text filled with insults, laughing emojis, and a flat refusal to pay a single penny. She claimed that since we chose to host our party at such a fragile, overpriced venue, we were entirely responsible for any accidents that occurred there. When I tried to call my father to get him to talk some sense into Rachel, he sighed deeply and told me that I should just let it go for the sake of family peace. He said that Rachel and her husband were going through a difficult financial patch, and asking them for $5,000 was cruel and unnecessary. I told my father that if Rachel did not pay for the damages her children caused, there would be serious consequences, but he just brushed me off. That was the exact moment David and I decided that we were going to draw a hard, permanent boundary for our upcoming wedding. 3 weeks later, we finalized our wedding website and began mailing out the official physical invitations to our guest list. On the front of the website, and clearly printed at the bottom of every single invitation, was a very explicit notice. This is a strictly adults-only event. No guests under the age of 21 will be permitted under any circumstances, and professional security will be enforcing this rule. I knew this would cause a storm, but I was fully prepared for the fallout because I was not going to let Rachel's children ruin my wedding day. The invitations were delivered on a Tuesday, and by Tuesday evening, my phone was ringing so violently it was practically bouncing off the kitchen counter. I answered the call to hear Rachel screaming so loudly that David could hear her from across the living room without the speakerphone even being on. "What is the meaning of this garbage invitation, Elena?" Rachel yelled, her voice crackling with pure rage. "Why does it say adults only? And why did you not include Leo and Mia's names on our family invitation card?" I took a deep breath, keeping my voice incredibly calm, cool, and professional. "It means exactly what it says. Rachel, our wedding is an adults-only event, and your children are not invited." "You are insane," she shrieked. "I know you did this specifically to target my children because you're still throwing a tantrum over a little spilled grape juice. They're your only niece and nephew. They've been talking about being in your wedding for months, and you are publicly humiliating them." I reminded her that her children had caused over $5,000 in damages at our engagement party, and that she had refused to pay for any of it. "If you had taken responsibility and paid the venue bill, we might have discussed making an exception. But you prove that you cannot control your kids," I said. "Therefore, they are not welcome at our wedding, and if you cannot find a babysitter for them, then you do not have to come either." "How dare you give me an ultimatum?" Rachel screamed, before slamming her phone down so hard the call disconnected. Within 10 minutes, my mother was calling me, using her most manipulative, tearful voice to try and guilt me into changing my mind. "Elena, please, you cannot do this to your sister. It is breaking her heart and making her feel like a terrible mother." My mother sobbed into the phone. "Your father and I are so embarrassed by your behavior, and our extended family is already asking why Leo and Mia are not going to be in the wedding." I told my mother that Rachel was a terrible mother because she refused to discipline her children, and that my decision was final. My mother's tone shifted instantly from tearful to cold and threatening. "If you do not allow those children to come to your wedding, your father and I are withdrawing our $20,000 financial contribution to your big day," she warned. "We will not fund a wedding that excludes our precious grandchildren. So you have 24 hours to fix this, or you'll be paying for everything yourself." I looked over at David, who gave me a reassuring nod, and I smiled because we had already anticipated this exact threat from my parents. We had actually saved up enough of our own money to pay for the entire wedding ourselves, and we had only accepted my parents' money as a gesture of goodwill. "Keep your money, Mom," I said calmly. "We do not need a single cent from you, and our guest list remains exactly as it is." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, as my mother had clearly expected me to break down, beg for forgiveness, and capitulate to her demands. "You are a cold, ungrateful child," she finally spat out before hanging up on me. Over the next 2 weeks, Rachel launched a massive, coordinated smear campaign against me on every social media platform she could find. She posted heavily edited photos of her children looking sad, with captions claiming that their cruel aunt had banned them from her wedding because she hated kids. She went so far as to claim that David and I were miserable people who wanted to ruin the lives of innocent children to feed our own massive egos. My aunts, uncles, and cousins from my mother's side of the family began sending me nasty text messages, calling me selfish and spoiled. Several of them threatened to boycott the wedding entirely if I did not apologize to Rachel and invite her children. Every time someone sent me a threatening message, I simply responded by canceling their RSVP, removing them from the guest list, and blocking their number. Within a week, our guest list had shrunk by 15 people, which actually saved us a significant amount of money on catering and bar services. David and I used those savings to hire high-quality, professional security guards for the wedding venue, specifically instructing them to block Rachel and her kids. We sent the security company photos of Rachel, her husband Greg, her children, and my parents, instructing them that under no circumstances were the children allowed inside. Meanwhile, Rachel was busy trying to find a way to bypass our system and force her children into the wedding. One afternoon, our wedding coordinator called me to report some very suspicious activity on our digital wedding RSVP website. Someone had logged in using my cousin's RSVP code and manually added Leo and Mia's names as guest additions, checking the boxes for the prime rib dinner. The IP address used to make the change was traced directly to Rachel's hometown, showing just how desperate and pathetic she had become. We immediately locked down the website, implemented a strict password protection system, and reverted the changes. I sent Rachel a text message warning her that any further attempts to interfere with our wedding planning would result in legal action. She didn't reply to the text, but my mother called my father to complain that I was threatening to sue my own sister. My father tried to play the peacemaker again, calling me to beg me to just let Rachel bring the kids and sit them at the back of the room. They will wear headphones, they won't make a sound. I promise you, Elena, your mother's crying every night because of this feud, he pleaded. I asked my father if he was going to personally guarantee the cost of any damages they caused, and if he would sign a legal contract agreeing to pay $50,000 if they disrupted the ceremony. He went completely silent, stammered for a few seconds, and then admitted that he couldn't make that promise because the kids were difficult to control. Exactly, Dad. So stop asking me to jeopardize my wedding day to spare Rachel's fragile feelings, I said before ending the call. As the wedding day approached, the tension in the family was thick enough to cut with a knife. My parents eventually realized that their financial blackmail had failed miserably, so they begrudgingly confirmed that they would still attend the wedding. However, they made it very clear that they were only attending out of social obligation, and that Rachel, on the other hand, had gone completely silent on social media, which made me incredibly suspicious because she was not the type of person to just give up. David and I met with our security team 3 days before the wedding to go over the final security protocols and emergency procedures. The security lead, a large professional man named Marcus, assured us that his team of off-duty police officers would handle any situation with absolute discretion. We have a strict perimeter control, Marcus explained, showing us the map of the venue with marked security checkpoints. No one gets past the front gates without an official physical invitation card that matches our verified master guest list. The day of the wedding finally arrived, and it was a stunning, crisp autumn morning. The venue was a gorgeous, historic stone manor surrounded by acres of private gardens, and the autumn leaves created a beautiful natural backdrop. As I put on my wedding gown, surrounded by my closest friends who actually supported me, I felt a deep sense of peace and excitement. The ceremony went off beautifully without a single hitch, and as David and I walked down the aisle as husband and wife, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. During the cocktail hour, guests mingled on the stone terrace, enjoying champagne and appetizers while a live string quartet played in the background. My parents stood in the corner of the terrace, looking miserable, refusing to congratulate us or even make eye contact with David's family. I ignored their childish behavior and focused on enjoying my day, convinced that the worst was behind us and that Rachel had finally given up. But I had severely underestimated the sheer depth of my sister's entitlement, jealousy, and malice. Around 7 in the evening, just as the reception was beginning and guests were finding their seats in the grand dining room, a commotion broke out at the front gates. Marcus, our security lead, quietly approached David and me at the head table, his expression serious as he leaned in to speak to us. "We have a situation at the main entrance gate," Marcus whispered. "Your sister has arrived, and she has brought her children with her. She is demanding entry, claiming she is part of the bridal party, and she is currently screaming at my officers." My heart sank into my stomach, but David immediately gripped my hand tightly under the table, his presence grounding me. "Do not let them in under any circumstances," David told Marcus, his voice quiet but filled with absolute authority. Marcus nodded, stated that they were already handling it, and walked back toward the entrance lobby. I couldn't sit there doing nothing, so I stood up, excused myself to our guests, and walked toward the lobby with David right by my side. As we opened the heavy wooden doors of the dining room, the sound of screeching and screaming filled the elegant marble lobby of the manor. Rachel was standing there, dressed in a casual denim jacket and dirty sneakers, dragging Leo and Mia by their hands as she tried to push past 2 large security guards. "Get your hands off me, you oversized thugs," Rachel shrieked, her face red with anger. "Do you know who I am? I am the bride's sister. These are the bride's only niece and nephew, and we have every right to be here. So move out of our way before I have you arrested for assault." Leo and Mia were screaming at the top of their lungs, kicking the antique furniture in the lobby and throwing plastic toys at the glass display cases. Mia was holding a large squeeze bottle of bright orange acrylic paint, and Leo had a plastic bag filled with liquid chocolate syrup. I realized with a sickening jolt of horror that Rachel had intentionally armed her children with paint and syrup, intending to have them ruin my wedding dress just like they ruined my engagement dress. It was not an accident. It was a planned, malicious act of revenge designed to completely destroy my wedding reception. Rachel saw me standing at the top of the lobby stairs, and her eyes flared with a psychotic, venomous rage. "There you are, you selfish little monster," Rachel screamed, pointing her finger at me. "Look at what you're doing to your own family. You're keeping my poor children out in the cold while you sit inside like a queen. You think you are better than us because you married a man with money, but you are nothing but a spoiled, heartless brat." My mother and father suddenly rushed out of the dining room behind us, having heard the commotion, and immediately ran down the stairs toward Rachel. "Oh my goodness, Rachel, what is going on?" my mother cried out, wrapping her arms around the screaming, paint-wielding children. "Elena, tell the security guard to stand down immediately. This is an absolute disgrace. How can you do this to your sister?" I stood my ground, my voice cold, steady, and clear as I spoke to the security guards. "Marcus, call the police right now and report a criminal trespass, vandalism attempt, and disturbing the peace," I ordered. Rachel's eyes widened in temporary shock, but she quickly recovered, letting out a loud, mocking laugh. "You won't call the police on your own sister. Elena, you don't have the guts. And you wouldn't dare create a public scandal at your perfect little wedding," she sneered. She then looked down at her children and gave them a subtle, wicked nod. "Go on, kids, go give your auntie a big hug," she whispered loudly, pushing them forward. Leo and Mia instantly broke free from my mother's grasp, unscrewing the caps of the paint bottle and the chocolate syrup bag as they charged toward the stairs. But they didn't make it even 3 steps. Marcus and another security officer moved with incredible speed, stepping directly into the children's path and grabbing them firmly by their arms. In his panic to get away, Leo squeezed the chocolate syrup bag too hard, causing the sticky dark brown liquid to explode backward, spraying directly into Rachel's face and chest. Mia lost her footing on the slick marble floor, slipping on her own orange paint and falling backward, taking Rachel down with her. Rachel crashed heavily onto the floor, landing face first into a large, decorative brass tray of dirty appetizers and cocktail napkins that a catering waiter had left on a side table. The The tray flipped over, showering Rachel with cold shrimp, dirty cocktail sauce, and half-eaten appetizers. She lay there on the marble floor, covered in orange paint, sticky chocolate syrup, and smelly cocktail sauce, screaming like a wild animal. The entire scene was so absurd and pathetic that several guests who had gathered at the dining room doors couldn't help but burst into laughter. My mother was hysterically screaming, trying to pull Rachel up, while my father stood there, pale and completely frozen in sheer embarrassment. Within minutes, the loud wail of police sirens echoed down the long driveway of the manor, and 3 police cruisers pulled up to the front entrance. The officers entered the lobby, their eyes widening in shock at the absolute circus of paint, syrup, shrimp, and screaming children. Marcus immediately stepped forward, presenting the officers with our venue contract, the written security directives, and the clear security footage of Rachel forcing her way past the gates. He also showed them the paint and chocolate syrup bottles, explaining that the children had been instructed by their mother to vandalize the bride's dress. Rachel scrambled to her feet, wiping cocktail sauce from her eyes as she pointed a finger at me, screaming at the officers. "She is the one who should be arrested. She assaulted my children. She locked us out. She is a psychopath," Rachel yelled hysterically. The police officer looked at her filthy appearance, the ruined lobby floor, and the security footage, and shook his head in disgust. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for criminal trespass, disorderly conduct, and contributing to the delinquency of minors," the officer said calmly. As the officer reached for his handcuffs, Rachel went completely frantic, grabbing her children and trying to run toward the back exit. The officers tackled her to the ground, pinning her arms behind her back as they clicked the metal handcuffs around her wrists. She screamed and cursed at me, using the most vile, disgusting language imaginable, as she was dragged out of the manor in front of all our wedding guests. Her children were crying hysterically, and my mother was chasing after the police cars, screaming that she was going to sue the entire police department. My father turned to me, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and deep shame. "Are you happy now, Elena?" he whispered. "You have officially destroyed this family, and your sister's going to jail because of you." "No, Dad," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "Rachel is going to jail because she is an entitled criminal who tried to ruin my wedding. You and Mom enabled her behavior for her entire life, and now she's finally facing the real-world consequences of her actions. If you don't like how I protect myself, you are more than welcome to leave my wedding right now, and don't bother coming back." My father stared at me for a long moment, realizing that his power over me was completely gone, before turning around and walking out into the night. My mother followed him, and we never saw them again for the rest of the evening. David and I walked back into the reception hall, where our guests welcomed us with a standing ovation and loud cheers. The band started playing, the champagne flowed, and we spent the rest of the night dancing, laughing, and celebrating our love with the people who actually cared about us. It was the most beautiful, perfect night of my life, and the departure of my toxic family only made the air feel lighter and cleaner. But the drama was far from over, and the real legal karma was about to hit Rachel and my parents like a freight train. The following Monday, David and I hired a prestigious family lawyer to handle the legal aftermath of the wedding incident. We had no intention of letting Rachel off the hook, and we wanted to make sure she paid for every single ounce of damage she had caused. First, we filed a formal lawsuit in small claims court against Rachel and her husband Greg for the $5,400 in damages from the engagement party. We submitted the venue invoice, the photos of the ruined antique wallpaper, and the testimony of the venue coordinator as ironclad evidence. Rachel tried to ignore the court summons, thinking that if she just didn't show up, the problem would go away. But the judge was not amused by her absence, and we were awarded a default judgment for the full amount, plus our legal fees and court costs. When Rachel refused to pay the court-ordered judgment, our lawyer successfully filed a petition to garnish her husband Greg's wages. Greg had no idea that Rachel had refused to pay the engagement party damages, as she had lied to him and claimed that we had settled the matter privately. When his employer notified him that his paycheck was being garnished by 15% every month to pay for his wife's destructive behavior, Greg was absolutely furious. But that was just the beginning of Greg's awakening to his wife's toxic nature. During Rachel's criminal arraignment for the wedding incident, the prosecutor played the high-definition security footage from the venue lobby. The footage clearly showed Rachel handing her children the paint and chocolate syrup, whispering instructions to them, and pushing them toward me. The judge was absolutely appalled by the footage, stating that using children as biological weapons to commit vandalism was one of the most disgusting acts of parenting he had ever witnessed. Rachel was convicted of criminal trespass, vandalism, and child endangerment. She was sentenced to 200 hours of community service, 2 years of supervised probation, and mandatory anger management and parenting classes. The court also issued a permanent restraining order prohibiting Rachel, her children, and my parents from coming within 500 feet of David and me. When Greg saw the security footage in court and realized that his wife had intentionally used their children to commit a crime, he finally snapped. He realized that Rachel's entitlement and my parents' toxic enabling had turned his children into undisciplined monsters and put them in physical danger. 2 weeks after the trial, Greg packed up his things, took Leo and Mia, and filed for divorce from Rachel. He cited her criminal conviction, her financial irresponsibility, and her unstable behavior as grounds for sole custody of the children. Our lawyer happily provided Greg's divorce attorney with all the security footage, court transcripts, and evidence we had gathered against Rachel. With that mountain of evidence, the family court judge granted Greg full physical and legal custody of Leo and Mia, ordering Rachel to pay child support. Rachel was only allowed supervised visitation for 2 hours every other week, and she was forced to move back into her parents' basement because she couldn't afford her own apartment. My parents were absolutely devastated by the loss of their grandchildren, and they tried to blame me for the destruction of Rachel's marriage. My mother sent me a long, hateful email claiming that I was a cold-hearted snake who had ruined her life and stolen her grandchildren. I forwarded that email directly to our lawyer, who sent my mother a formal cease and desist letter, warning her that any further contact would result in harassment charges and a violation of the restraining order. My father tried to reach out to David, begging him to convince me to drop the restraining order so we could have a family sit-down. David told him to never contact us again, stating that we no longer had a family on my side, and blocked his number forever. With my toxic family completely removed from our lives, David and I sold our suburban house and moved to a beautiful, historic home in a quiet town 3 states away. We started our own business, which has been incredibly successful, and we are currently expecting our first child, a beautiful baby girl. Our home is filled with love, peace, and laughter, completely free from the jealousy, entitlement, and drama that used to suffocate my life. Sometimes I think back to that sticky red grape juice on my engagement dress, and I smile, because that was the exact moment I finally found the strength to free myself from a lifetime of toxic abuse. Rachel wanted to ruin my white dress, but in her desperate attempt to destroy my life, she only ended up destroying her own. Our new beginning in the quiet, tree-lined town of Oak Ridge was everything we had ever dreamed of. But a toxic family's obsession does not simply fade away when you cross state lines. We had established a beautiful home office for our design consultancy, and my pregnancy was progressing smoothly into the 3rd trimester. Our local doctor was wonderful, the neighbors were warm, and for the first 6 months, we felt a level of safety we had never experienced before. But the peace we had built was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon when our office assistant handed me a heavy, unmarked cardboard box that had been delivered via courier. Inside the box was a handmade baby blanket, knitted in a sickeningly familiar shade of pastel pink, accompanied by a silver baby rattle that had been engraved with the words "Grandmother's Little Angel." Tucked beneath the tissue paper was a handwritten letter from my mother, Karen, her elegant cursive script filled with a disturbing mix of maternal affection and delusional entitlement. She wrote that she had forgiven me for my past cruelty, that she knew I was just stressed during the wedding, and that she was ready to move into our guest room for 3 months to help me raise my daughter. She didn't ask if she could come. She simply stated that she would be arriving in Oak Ridge 3 weeks before my due date, expecting us to welcome her with open arms. My stomach twisted into a tight knot of pure anxiety as I realized that they had somehow bypassed our strict privacy protocols and located our new address. David immediately took the letter from my trembling hands, his face hardening as he read her manipulative words. And he walked straight to our home computer to pull up our security camera feed. We realized that my mother must have hired cheap, unlicensed private investigator or used a shady online database to track down our business registration, which was a matter of public record. David contacted our attorney, who immediately drafted an emergency motion to domesticate our existing restraining order in our new state, ensuring that local law enforcement had all the paperwork on file. We also sent a formal, legally binding warning letter to my mother's home address, explicitly stating that if she or any member of her family set foot in our town, they would be arrested on sight. My mother did not take this warning well, and within 48 hours, she began bombarding our business email with frantic, histrionic messages. She claimed that I was committing emotional elder abuse by denying her the right to see her grandchild, and she threatened to take us to court for grandparents' rights. Our attorney laughed at her threats, reassuring us that grandparents' rights laws in our new state were incredibly strict and did not apply to estranged parents who had a history of enabling criminal behavior. While we were preparing for our daughter's birth and dealing with my mother's digital harassment, a major event occurred back in our hometown that would change the financial dynamics of our family forever. My maternal grandfather, Arthur Sr., passed away peacefully at the age of 89 after a long battle with dementia. Grandpa Arthur had been a highly successful real estate developer, and, unlike my parents, he had always been a man of immense integrity who despised the way my mother and father spoiled Rachel. He had witnessed Rachel's entitlement firsthand over the years, and he had been deeply disgusted when he learned about the absolute disaster she had caused at our engagement party and wedding. 2 weeks after his funeral, which David and I did not attend to avoid a public confrontation, we received an official letter from the executor of his estate. We were requested to join a secure video conference call for the formal reading of Grandpa Arthur's will and the distribution of his multi-million-dollar estate. When we logged onto the secure call, I saw the faces of my mother, my father, and Rachel, who was sitting in her parents' basement, looking pale, disheveled, and incredibly bitter. The moment Rachel saw my face on the screen, she glared at the camera with a level of pure, venomous hatred that made my skin crawl. The estate attorney cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began reading the formal document, which had been updated just 6 months before Grandpa Arthur's passing. The will started with a series of standard distributions, but then it moved to the primary assets, and the room went completely silent as the attorney read the specific clauses. To my beloved daughter Karen and her husband, I leave the sum of $1. As they have spent their entire lives mismanaging their finances and enabling the destructive behavior of their eldest child, the attorney read. To my granddaughter Rachel, I leave the sum of $5,000, on the strict condition that this money be used exclusively to pay off her outstanding legal debts and court-ordered child support. The attorney paused, took a sip of water, and then continued, his voice echoing through the speakers of our computer. To my granddaughter Elena, who has shown immense strength, independence, and integrity in the face of family adversity, I leave the remainder of my estate, including my primary residence, my investment portfolio, and a trust fund totaling $450,000. Rachel let out a literal shriek of rage, slamming her hands onto the table and leaning so close to her camera that her face became distorted. "This is a lie. This is an absolute setup," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysterical anger as she pointed a finger at the screen. Elena manipulated him. She used her husband's money to buy his affection, and she took advantage of a dying old man with dementia to steal our inheritance, Rachel yelled. My mother was openly sobbing into a tissue, wailing that her own father had betrayed her, while my father sat there with his head in his hands, looking completely ruined. The estate attorney calmly muted Rachel's microphone, warning her that any further outbursts would result in her immediate removal from the digital conference. He then presented a certified medical evaluation from Grandpa Arthur's primary care physician, dated the exact day the will was signed, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was of perfectly sound mind and fully aware of his decisions. The reality of the situation began to set in for my family, and the sheer desperation of their financial ruin became painfully apparent. Rachel was facing mounting legal bills. Her child support payments to her ex-husband Greg were piled up, and my parents were drowning in debt after paying for her criminal defense and a failed custody battle. They had been fully relying on Grandpa Arthur's inheritance to bail them out of their self-inflicted financial grave, and now that money belonged entirely to me. Within hours of the will reading, my father sent me a long, desperate text message, completely abandoning his previous hostile tone. "Elena, please, I'm begging you as your father. We are on the verge of losing our house," he wrote, his words filled with a pathetic, defeated humility. "Your sister is facing jail time if she cannot pay her child support, and your mother's health is failing from the stress of this entire ordeal. We know we made mistakes, but we are still your family, and your grandfather would not want you to watch us starve while you sit on hundreds of thousands of dollars. Please do the right thing and share the inheritance with your sister so we can finally put this painful chapter behind us and be a family again." I read the message to David, and we both knew that this was just another manipulative attempt to guilt me into funding the very people who had tried to destroy our lives. I replied with a single, short sentence: "You made your bed, now you can sleep in it," and blocked his number, refusing to engage in any further discussion. That rejection was the final spark that pushed my sister and my mother over the edge of absolute madness, leading to a desperate, criminal act of revenge. It was a cold, rainy Friday evening, and I was home alone while David was at a business dinner with a major client on the other side of town. I was sitting on our living room sofa, reading a book on infant care, when the loud, rhythmic chiming of our smart doorbell echoed through the house. I picked up my phone and opened the security app, expecting to see a delivery driver with a package. But my heart stopped when I saw the faces on the high-definition camera feed. Standing on our front porch, drenched in the cold rain and shivering, were my sister Rachel and my mother Karen, their faces twisted with a wild, desperate intensity. Rachel was holding a heavy metal crowbar in her right hand, while my mother was clutching a large, empty canvas duffel bag, looking around the porch like a paranoid criminal. "Open this door right now. Elena, I know you are in there," Rachel screamed, slamming the heavy crowbar against the solid oak wood of our front door. "You stole our money. You stole our grandfather's inheritance, and you are not going to sit inside your beautiful house while we have nothing. We are here to get what belongs to us, and if you don't open this door, we're going to break every single window in this house and take it by force." My maternal instincts kicked in instantly, and a surge of adrenaline rushed through my body, completely washing away the temporary panic. I stood up, walked into our master bedroom, locked the heavy interior door, and immediately dialed 911 on my cell phone. I explained the situation to the dispatcher, informing her that I was highly pregnant, home alone, and that two individuals with a history of violence and active interstate restraining orders were currently trying to break into my home with a weapon. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me, her calm voice reassuring me that multiple police cruisers were already en route to my address with their emergency sirens off to avoid alerting the suspects. Through our security app, I watched in absolute horror as Rachel walked over to our large living room window and began slamming the metal crowbar against the double-paned glass. The first strike created a massive spiderweb crack across the glass, and on the third strike, the window shattered inward with a loud, violent crash. Rachel reached her arm through the broken glass, unlocked the window frame, and began dragging her wet, filthy body into our pristine living room. followed closely by my mother. They began throwing our decorative vases onto the floor, tearing down our framed artwork, and screaming my name as they searched the house for valuables. "Where is the safe? Elena, where did you hide the grandfather's jewelry and the cash?" Rachel shrieked, kicking open the door to our guest bedroom and throwing the mattress onto the floor. "You think you are so smart, but you're going to pay for what you did to my marriage, my kids, and my life." As they approached our master bedroom door, I heard the heavy, thudding sound of the front door being kicked open from the outside, followed by the loud, authoritative commands of our local police department. "Police, drop your weapons and get on the ground right now," several officers screamed, their flashlights illuminating the darkened hallway. Rachel let out a wild, animalistic screech and tried to run toward the back exit of the house. But she was immediately tackled to the ground by two large officers, the metal crowbar clattering loudly across the hardwood floor. My mother began screaming hysterically, claiming that they were the victims, that they had just come to visit their loving daughter, and that the police were violating their civil rights. The officers ignored her delusions, pinning her arms behind her back and clicking the heavy steel handcuffs around her wrists as they dragged both of them out of our house and into the pouring rain. David arrived home just as the police were loading Rachel and my mother into the back of separate patrol cars, his face pale with a mixture of terror and absolute fury as he ran to our bedroom to hold me. I was shaking, but our daughter was safe, and the physical security of our home had successfully protected us from their final, desperate assault. The local police chief personally walked into our living room, expressing his deep disgust at the situation and assuring us that this would be treated as a high-level felony offense, since they had crossed state lines with a weapon to violate an active restraining order, commit a residential burglary, and assault a pregnant woman. The charges were incredibly severe. The legal hammer fell on them with absolute, uncompromising force, and this time, there was no father to bail them out or sweep their crimes under the rug. Rachel's probation from her previous wedding arrest was immediately revoked, and she was held without bail in a high-security county jail facility pending her trial. My mother was also denied bail, as the prosecution presented the security footage of her participating in the break-in and carrying the empty duffel bag to collect the stolen goods. The trial was swift, and with the ironclad security camera footage and the 911 audio recording, the jury reached a unanimous guilty verdict in less than 2 hours. Rachel was convicted of felony residential burglary, possession of a dangerous weapon during the commission of a felony, stalking, and felony violation of a protection order. The judge, noting her complete lack of remorse and her extensive history of harassing her sister, sentenced her to 8 years in a state penitentiary with no possibility of early parole. My mother was convicted of conspiracy to commit burglary, felony trespassing, and stalking, and she was sentenced to 4 years in a medium-security correctional facility, along with a $50,000 fine. The financial strain of the legal fees, the fines, and the absolute public humiliation finally broke my father, who had spent his entire life enabling the madness of his wife and eldest daughter. He realized that his blind loyalty to them had left him completely bankrupt, alone, and hated by everyone in his community. He filed for divorce from my mother while she was sitting in her prison cell, sold their family home to pay off their remaining debts, and moved into a tiny, rundown studio apartment above a noisy auto repair shop. He now lives on a meager Social Security check, completely cut off from his grandchildren, his daughters, and the comfortable life he had once enjoyed. 3 weeks after the sentencing, in the quiet, peaceful sanctuary of our local hospital, I gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl whom we named Lily. Holding her in my arms, looking in her clear, innocent eyes, I felt a profound sense of closure and an overwhelming feeling of absolute victory. No toxic grandmothers would ever whisper manipulative lies into her ears, and no entitled aunts would ever try to ruin her milestones or steal her joy. David and I have built a fortress of love, security, and peace around our daughter, and the dark shadow of my childhood family has been permanently erased from our reality. We used a small portion of Grandpa Arthur's inheritance to fully repair our living room window and upgrade our home security system to military-grade standards, ensuring our absolute privacy. The rest of the money has been securely invested in a college trust fund for Lily, ensuring that her future is bright, prosperous, and entirely under our control. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on our porch on a warm summer evening, watching David gently rock our daughter to sleep, I am filled with a deep, peaceful gratitude for the choices we made. We refused to let family guilt destroy our boundaries. We stood firm against entitlement, and in doing so, we won the ultimate prize of a beautiful, peaceful, and truly happy life.